Okay, well, Layton's getting started here, and I'm skipping the usual video over thing because Google kept on screwing up, and I couldn't seem to get around that. Every time I tried to share screen to put up my opening thing, I was getting a panic stop, and it was malfunctioning. I'm not sure whether you're watching me. I've lost even my a listing of where the thing is. I'll have to see if I can find what the hell I'm doing here. So pardon a moment. I will attempt to blither blather while I attempt to catch up where I was and have the commentary on screen in the live chat. So pardon, there is a screw up in the works and I'm attempting to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. Let me see. First, I need to find out. So we are, in fact, on the air, I hope, and we'll have a bunch of things to discuss. Jackson, we will hopefully be in shortly, and I will see whether or not I can locate where I need to locate for everything else. So while I'm waiting to find out whether I can get up to the YouTube channel and get the live chat back onto my feed and stuff, part of the main project is dealing with Contested Bones, which is the anti-evolution book by Rupi and Sanford that I've been analyzing for the umpteen past months, source by source. They're still holding firm on their incompetence. About half of their technical literature they misrepresent by suppressing content or just using it for authority quotes. And they're now into, I'm doing the chapter on Australopithecus Sediba, and their attempts to say that part of it's just a human being, kind of, and other parts are just ape-ish, and that they're two jumbled up messes, and they just authority quote things. Nobody really doubts that it's pretty much a single taxon, and it's got mosaic set of features. Their hands are almost human, not quite. And I put a technical paper up that refers to that discussion, which they cited, by the way. And then another one on the brain structure or the skull structure, which the creationists are insisting is just ape. Well, no, not quite. It's Australopithecine-like, which is not quite like the regular apes. And there was another paper from 2016 that they didn't cite that I put up, which went through allometric bits because they found a baby, an infant Australopithecus Sediba, and they were trying to figure out what they might look like as an adult. And so they were modeling allometrically the various modes, whether you were talking about a chimpanzee mode or an Australopithecine mode or a human mode, as to how the genes in that play around. And you can see in the graphic that is up there in the technical paper, which is available open access, you can see that there's only tiny variations in how the skull form would work out as an adult, mainly involving how projecting the face is and some of the things about the bun-shaped nature of the skull and all of that, which is perfectly understandable given how incremental evolution is. That the thing that makes the Australopithecines and Sediba not conventional ape is the fact that they have a comparatively flat face compared to the regular apes. And that would, at one point, in fact, it's always fun when you're doing source analysis to look at what doesn't get a reference, because that's often the place where they're doing the shell game. That at one point they're saying that Berger considers the narrower face and other features, the shape of the cranium, the parietal, temporal, infraorbital region, etc., to be, quote, derived, unquote, meaning more human-like. However, none of these features are outside the normal range of variation found in living apes. Consider a side-by-side comparison of the juvenile MH1 skull attributed to Sediba with that of a juvenile chimpanzee and bonobo. In Berger's analysis of the skull in Science, he acknowledges that overall the skull aligns most closely with the ape-like Australopithecines. Well, the point is, although he's got references for Berger and other relevant people, for this particular point about the comparison between the skulls and that juvenile chimpanzee and bonobo would be like this, he doesn't have a reference. And it's probably because he wouldn't be able to defend the argument that they were just like that. Although technically speaking, we are not that dissimilar. If you go back early enough to the chimpanzee form or any primate, that they have relatively similar internal structures as juveniles and as embryos in particular, which then gets us to the issue that our little pals in anti-evolution land don't like to think about, which is what exactly would a transitional form look like? Ruby and Sanford, as I pointed out before, never say. And as one of the things I study in the TIP project is that I can't find any anti-evolutionist who ever says. They'll tell you why they reject whatever it is they're rejecting, but they will not tell you what they would accept, what they would need to have it look like for them to go, well, that's a transitional. Never, under any circumstance, do they deal with that. Okay, let me check over here with my stupid little YouTube to see if I can find the live chat in there anywhere. Again, pardon for my muddle, or rather Google Chrome's muddle. It's possible everyone in the world is talking on it today because they're all talking about President Trump's speech last night or something like that. You know, we'll do that as a opportunity. But I wanted to confirm by getting into the live chat to find out whether or not, are you seeing this? Because I really don't know. The fact that it took me a bit of a delay to get going on this is not a happy thing. On the book front, before I get off on the additional material, well, anyway, I put the links up to the various technical papers on the Sediba matter, and one of the issues in Science that was doing a little summary description of it, and you can follow up then on your own as usual. Don't take my word for anything. Anyway, thanks to a wonderful Christmas gift with Amazon.com that I got for Christmas, I was able to splurge on the Cambrian explosion book from Irwin and Valentine from 2013, that has been cited by anti-evolutionists. And so I was frustrated at the fact that I wasn't able to get it because it's like 75 bucks and it was on sale there for like 67. So it was something that was manageable to be able to glom onto. But that's the bits of scholarship. On the freebie front, some creationists I was jousting with on Twitter made the mistake of trying to throw Goldschmidt and stuff at me, like 1940 is really cutting edge. And it turns out his book, The Material Basis of Evolution, was available on full text online as a PDF. And so I was able to download that and realize that if anybody is trying to guide their view of 21st century science based on a 1940 book, problem. In fact, Goldschmidt sticks himself right out and argues that incipient speciation is impossible. Doesn't exist. And sorry, we can see that in the technical literature. Wouldn't necessarily have been the case back in 1940, but Goldschmidt's dead. And anybody in 2019 drawing on that antiquated material had jolly well better get caught up to speed. So anyway, we've got a wonderful bit of things. And another little thing that occurred to me, just quite a delicious surprise this morning, is that I got a little note on my emails that Taz Walker, Answers in Genesis Taz Walker, had been checking to see whether he had been cited by me in 3 Macroevolutionary Episodes, the book that I have up at the TIP website. And yes, it did. So that means that somebody, at least at Answers in Genesis, is kind of sort of maybe paying attention to some of the stuff that I've been doing. And we'll find out whether or not that ever ends up. People who follow the exciting world of creationism and intelligent design, if you happen to catch a blurb on that, let me know if I haven't caught it already. I do follow AIG on Twitter. Okay, I think I'm starting to get my pop-up chat out, and we'll find out whether or not we are actually being seen by people. Boy, this is the first time I've had a glitch up with Google, so it's very possible these demons or too much traffic going on during the day, or just some little weird F up. Okay. Hi, gang. Let me find out. We come in there. Is everybody seeing things okay? And we'll see whether or not anybody responds, in which case that means that we will be okay. So, Jackson Wheat may be in at some point. Yay, old Scratch. Thanks. I wasn't sure. Again, I apologize for the clumsiness. I'm an old fart. I'm amazed that any of this stuff works at all. This is all magic-y thing from somebody who comes from the ancient days. And but before I launch into something, I'll just say that I was seeing Lynn Miranda put up Puffalovagus asks, how do YEC and IDers downplay the observations of the stickleback fish? Oh, they just argue it's trivial. There's a little bit of coverage on it in Intelligent Designers, and to some extent Answers in Genesis, I think, has glomped into it, and ICR, but it's all just simply regarded as, it's still fish. It's not changing anything. So they can't really deal in fact, there was a brand new paper. I'm just going off my memory here on the dynamics and the genetics of that I think it traces to a particular oddball gene that pops up over and over again. And there's a big trade-off aspect. I was either in Science or Nature, one of those journals. Anyway, I was just going to say that I'd seen Mary Poppins Returns yesterday, and I was putting a compliment to Lynn Miranda, Miranda on Twitter, where he was showing some stuff about how he was climbing up the clock tower and all of that. It's a delightful little movie, and I saw it back, Mary Poppins, in 1964. That dates me. I was only 12 at the time. So this is a bit of nostalgia fest that's been kind of knocking around in my brain. Plus, it allowed me to be somewhere else when President Trump gave his speech at 6 o'clock here. So I was able to catch it later, and it was boilerplate nothing. Anyway, so back on to the exciting world of Evolution Hour. When Jackson comes in, assuming Jackson can make it, we'll discuss a bit more about The Rocks Are There, Still There book that we're doing. For those of you who don't have Evolution Slam Dunk, you need to. That's full source methods, full bore, which is to take a very precise topic or set of topics and go into how the anti-evolutionists approaches them. It's exactly what I've been doing with the Contested Bones book. It's that anti-evolutionists and people believe things that aren't true in general are falling back on is the fact that they have bad source methods. They're relying on secondary sources. They're tendentiously authority quoting things. They're not really working out what they think happened. They're not trying to honestly approach all the data field. And that shows at the source methods level. It's impossible to conceal it. The Puffalophagus continues. So do they use the same stick to wave away the big bird lineage? Oh, they use that stick to wave away everything. I call it xenoslicing in the old tip book. I think you'll encounter that concept in the old chapter 1. Download all the PDFs I've got up in there and peruse them at your leisure. I know I don't have indexing and stuff for that stuff because I wrote that a long time ago, and with the intent that it might actually be a book. At that point, it expanded to the point where it was way too extensive to be able to pull that off, and so that's what I've been converting over bit by bit to this tip project on the website. But anyway, xenoslicing, if you're familiar with old Zeno, that's the old paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, where Zeno thought he had proven that motion was impossible, that Achilles could never pass the tortoise because the tortoise would always be moving ahead slightly, and by the time he got up to there, it had moved forward. He was trying to do differential calculus and add up infinitely small series of sums, and they didn't have the math for that until Leibniz and Newton invented it in the 17th century. So you can understand why he goofed, but of course it was also intuitively stupid, because you're going, excuse me, but you can run past tortoises. So there must be something wrong with his argument. Well, xenoslicing as a concept then is that you carve up a data set in so much that you don't see the thing you don't want to see. And in the realm of transitional fossils, the main problem is that anti-evolutionists, as I said, never, ever, ever work out what they would accept as data. They only find ways of dismissing things. So it can be dismissed as, well, it's still a bird, or it's still a turtle, or it's still a fish. And we have to remember that speciation by definition is microevolutionary. Sometimes it doesn't even involve much genetics. You can have two virtually identical genetically species, morphologically almost identical, but they're now separate breeding populations because a tiny little epigenetic marker has flipped their breeding cycle over to a different time zone. Hi, Jackson is here. I've been holding down the fort. We had a panic for the first 5 or 10 minutes because Google kept on screwing up on me. That's the first time that's happened. It's going, Google is not responding. Well, that's helpful. So I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I could just go back into the same room that I had the information on and whether it would say, hi, you're a visitor to R.J. Downard's room. You have no ability to start the show. But no, it recognized me, and so I was able to start the broadcast. Then I had to find out whether the people in the live chat are going, what happened to RJ? I've been raptured. No.
Technology.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm amazed that it doesn't screw up more often, really, when you consider all the things that are going on and the amount of people on YouTube. I mean, just look at the number of flat earthers doing YouTube. They must be clogging the bandwidth with stupid. And so it's amazing that that it just doesn't cause the whole thing to happen. Maybe that's it. Google was just seeing one too many thing and then a bunch of Donald Trump speeches, and it suddenly went, no, I just can't take it. I just can't take it. And just had a conniption fit there for a while.
I hope the internet isn't autonomous. But
well, it's only a matter of time, because they'll be having things in terms of artificial intelligence to vet things. I'm presuming that as you get more and more into monetization and editing systems and the like, you're going to have more autonomous systems running. Because people won't have the time to be able to do all the fiddly bits themselves. Yeah, we'll find out. If I live long enough, I'll be seeing more things to frustrate me.
That's also what causes people to get demonetized, is all these algorithms.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't been monetized, so I don't have to worry about it. Puffa asks, are you saying they think the cartoon where a fish grows legs and walks out of the ocean is considered a documentary? Ironically, that's actually a perfectly fine heuristic for the process that's going on, moving from aquatic tetrapod through to early terrestrial one, and then finally into amphibians. It's just simply a way of tidying things up, even though no individual organism is doing all of that. But the point is they don't think about all of that. In fact, the very point came up in a little side chat that Jackson and I were doing, because I've been revising one of the chapters that we had done, because I had some new material on it about Haldane's dilemma and peppered moth and stuff that came in via Sanford, who we are criticizing in chapter 4 at length. And I was bringing that in, and it happened to bring up our old little buddy, Mike Riddle. And one of the things that Riddle had made in one of his Answers in Genesis books in To Dismiss the Origin of Life, and that was says, how long would it take for all the 60 trillion cells of your body to assemble at random? Well, that's not how it works. Well, and in fact, yeah. All of our 60 trillion cells are assembled in the course of 9 months from one cell. And so clearly this doesn't take a colossal amount of time. And if you take that process and start pulling it apart, you can start seeing the thing. I didn't put it into the note particularly, but one of the things that would be part of that pulling that process apart is that things that we see in our own embryos is the transition from the multiple jawbone layout in the embryo to where the dentary bone takes over and the extra bones are pulled up into the middle ear. And we have the fossils of that and the genetics and all the rest of the stuff. So all of that is an indication of why Mike Riddle is never going to win his Nobel Prize for evolutionary genetics.
I had actually come across that chapter, that Does Evolution Have a Chance? And it was just so paltry. I decided to rip it apart in a footnote. That's how meager it is.
It was short. The reason why it came up is that it was emerging as a little side point somewhere else. And AIG just reminded me of it. So I was going back there going, and I was looking through its pure origins or bust and all the rest. But the fact that he was talking about genetic information again, so I decided to slip it into that section. The big thing that I've been inserting that's been occupying, and I was literally working on it this morning, getting up because I wanted to resolve it all, was the Sanford and his use of Haldane's dilemma. And we had skipped over it before. We hadn't brought it up in the chapter initially, but in looking back through it, I was prodded to think through that Haldane matter and the fact that Haldane's dilemma pops up in the anti-evolution literature a lot, which I put in the referencing notes. But the neat thing about it is that the example that Haldane was relying on largely back in 1957, in case you don't know what Haldane's dilemma is, you can Google it, but I'll give you the short form. It's that Haldane, in looking at the new genetic information, new for 1957 era of Sputnik, was thinking that there was a line in the sand as to how rapidly gene substitutions could take place. And this supposedly was an impenetrable barrier that would produce a high cost of selection. And that was later dubbed Haldane's dilemma by Lee Van Valen in 1963. But it didn't last very long, because 5 years later, Maynard Smith started blowing it to smithereens in an article. And then more people came along in the next year. And by the time that by 2000s, it was a non-problem because it was just wrong. that his numbers were wrong, his initial assumptions were wrong, he wasn't dealing with population genetics, and so it was just bye. Well, ironically, the example that he was using as a real world instance was the peppered moth, which of course allowed me, we hadn't brought up the peppered moth example in the book previously, and so I thought that was a perfectly fine way to slip that in and get Jonathan Wells and all the other little gangs going, and the fact that we have the genes on that. So I have some additional references. That's how people write books in the world, at least the way we do them, which is we want to be comprehensive and up to date. Well, so we are covering as much. Yeah, jump in, Jackson.
Even Kent Hovind, I think to this very day, still thinks that the peppered moth experiment was a failure. Like he thinks it was forged, which is like,
well, yeah, he's relying on people who claim that, and you still find Jonathan Wells is still fuming about that. I put in the references on that
because even creationists are like, it doesn't mean anything. It's still a moth.
yeah. So and so this is all part of that xenoslicing. Yeah. You have to understand the principles involved. That what the peppered moth was illustrating was literally how a point mutation could be selected by the physical systems, and they verified that it was in fact bird predation, and the coloration was indeed correlated to air pollution matters. The light moths became increasingly visible against sooty crap. Jonathan Wells in particular, I didn't go into it in the note, but I'll put a little side reference into it on here. I think I may have alluded to it in 3 macroevolutionary episodes. I'm not sure. But anyway, Wells, I am convinced, was riffing off of Jerry Coyne, because Jerry Coyne had mistakenly described, when he reviewed Majerus's book in Nature in 1999, which inadvertently launched part of this whole flap about the peppered moth in the creationism movement. But he was saying that only Majerus had only seen a couple moths ever alighted on trees. Well, that wasn't true. Actually, about a third of the moths that he spotted were on trees, if you actually looked in the original book. So Coyne just made a mistake. And Jonathan Wells then, who never cited Coyne for years and years, never cited that review. Why? Because I think he was parasitizing off it and didn't want anybody to notice. But anyway, Wells jumped it up to only one moth seen on trees. And somewhere in a pile of my printouts downstairs in my fire hazard of stacks of paper in the basement is a printout I did, and it's missing. I think it's gone from the internet now, but I have a hard copy of it. Grant, who is a moth expert, different from the Grants that do the Galapagos finch stuff. I can't remember his first name, David Grant, Brian Grant, something like that. Anyway, he is a big moth guy, and they had a moth chat room going in the early 2000s, and Jonathan Wells bumped into it, and he was starting to throw off his expert knowledge on moths among moth experts, and this was not going well. And at one point, Grant said, you know, it's odd that Wells should have made the same mistake that Jerry Coyne did in his review of Majerus's book. And suddenly, Wells wasn't in that chat very long after that. He skipped out. So somewhere, I think I've got the physical hard copy printout of that. Whoops.
You know, that actually reminds me of little screw-ups like that. I've been seeing a lot of those on Twitter recently. One happened the other day where Take That Darwin retweeted some creationist saying something stupid. He said, this creationist said, you know, oh, you're showing me an example of a flower turning into a flower. Well, when a flower becomes a cactus, get back to me on that. And so Take That Darwin and I both sent him, you know, cactus is a flower, right?
Yeah.
And he blocked us both.
The awkward problem on a lot of trying to pin down the fiddly bit elements is that you get scattershot things. And that's the other phrase that I make use of in the old tip book, which is the Bermuda Triangle defense, which is referring to, is there a fossil gap? Where would you spot the fossils? How easily are they preserved? How much rock is available on particular things? What circumstances will produce the preservation of something? And literally, I don't know of any example of any anti-evolutionist who ever bothers to look into the context of the fossil gaps. I specifically mentioned the Triassic. Oh, yeah, jump in.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. You're right. Savannah got me for Christmas a book by James Valentine titled "On the Origin of Phyla," and he actually,
yeah, that's 2004. I got that as well. It's a juicy book, even to this day. It's just chock a block with stuff.
I'm actually about to get to the part where he talks about fossils.
You may not have spotted this. Thanks to my Amazon.com gift of this Christmas, I was able to get the Cambrian Explosion that Valentine co-wrote with Douglas Irwin.
Wow.
So, yay! It's an expensive one. It was initially $75, which is why I could never afford it before. And even at that, it was like
a textbook
or so. Not a textbook, but it was one of their big works. It's got a huge, long list of the animal phyla and what the earliest fossil representation is. They didn't do it as a graphic chart the way I did in TIP, but when I get around to revising that, I'll have this as part of the data set as to what they regard as phyla or not. And plus, I know Casey Luskin and a few other people were riffing off of it, saying, "See, this is actually showing the problems of the Cambrian explosion." Oh, really? And I couldn't check that because I didn't have the original book available. And so that's one of those that I had on my, I'd like to get that, particularly because Valentine is just brilliant. And I wanted to be able to see what that was. So now I have that.
Oh, yeah.
Proceed accordingly.
He's doing a wonderful, or he's got a wonderful summary on how phylogenies are constructed and that sort of stuff. And that's what I'm reading about right now. Actually, also Donald Prothero, in his book, Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters, also talks about the scattershot nature of the fossil record, how we determine phylogenies, things like that.
Yeah, I definitely would recommend. You have the new edition of Prothero, although it's apparently not just minor revisions compared to the older version that I had, or rather check out from the library. After everybody gets Evolution slam dunk, then you can put Prothero and Valentine's books on your to get list, but make sure you get Evolution slam dunk.
And then the rocks were there.
And then the rocks were there. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get that out of the way this year. It's a juicy, fun thing to do. Both of us, I think, have been learning tons about stuff the other one didn't know in the course. And plus, we're adding new papers that are popping up all the time that are relevant to particular points. I'm annoying him, and he's annoying me as we'll see some brand new paper that's relevant to a point. We go, oh, we got to put that in. So it will be very, very up-to-date material in the same way Evolution Slam Dunk was. And instead of just tackling the reptile-mammal transition, we're vaporizing huge swaths of answers in Genesis.
Speaking of up to date, I actually cited a paper today published this current year on the 3rd. So,
there's new stuff is coming in. That's one advantage. I recommend strongly, if there are 3 areas that you want to pay attention to, if you want to be on the pulse: Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which comes out every Tuesday, and then Science and Nature that come out Thursday and Friday. I think Nature comes out on Thursday, and I just can see the abstracts because I don't have a subscription to it, but you're in college, so you have access, and there are various ways to get around to get full text. But anyway, those 3 journals are the pulse feeders, and you can keep track of an awful lot of incoming relevant information. There will be wonderful papers that will be in specialized journals, but believe me, there's not enough time in the day to be able to track all the different journals. I think I've got 1,300 or a ton of journals that I've.
There's an entire journal on lactal mammaries, an entire journal,
and some specific technical literature then is going to pop up in obscure journals like that, where they are basically for the specialist in the field. Well, what you want is stuff that can get you onto the field. And sometimes then you'll find, and both of us, I'm sure, have discovered that in our research, that you'll find out about the background core or specialized journals by reading the summary articles that experts do in Annual Review of Genetics and all of that stuff. So these are the tricks you pick up to avoid the fact that you don't have a Hydra set of brains that can look at 1,000 things simultaneously. You got to be able to triage important stuff. And those 3 journals are the ones, the PNAS, easy peasy, because it's a public thing and everything in it is full, free, open access after a year. So for older articles, everybody can gain access and download the full PDFs. You don't have to have firewalls like Science or Nature. Although Science, typically, if you're in a fairly good-sized metropolitan area, you'll find them at your public library. Nature, you'll certainly find that if you have a college library available. So you can find, even without the old-fashioned way that I had to do photocopying things in the ancient times before the internet, there's ways of finding this stuff. So there's a whole tools kit to go through. I, as a not rich person, can attest to the fact that how much information is out there for not rich people. And knowledge is not the priority of the people with the PhDs from Oxford University. No, hell no. It's for everybody. Puffalophagus asks, you're Puffy's just pushing all the questions. What happens to Kent Hovind's favorite talking point if they find out the chemicals leached from primordial earth rocks were essential to the first life forming, which in fact they have? Yeah, there's a brand new paper on that very topic. I can't remember whether it was in PNAS or one of the others, but yeah, I try to keep track of all that material. The reason why I described the fire hazard stacks is because whenever possible, like when I can afford ink, I like to do hard copy printouts, and individual papers may actually relate to a bunch of different topics. So I figure out what's the first one I'm going to deal with in the course of the tip work, and I'll land it there. Also, nowadays, if I can say the PDF copies, if I'm hitting a topic like what we're doing in this book, masses of the material that we've been covering is buried somewhere in the fire hazard stacks. But because I have the open access text, as they come up, I can take a look at them anyway without having to worry about where they are in whether I have a hard copy printed up in that way or not. Then there's also a whole bunch of stuff that I did for about 4 or 5 years on a hiatus where I was still collecting data but not putting it into the bibliography, because literally it would have done no good, because my bibliography was pushing up to the size of a floppy disk storage. And so I couldn't save my bibliography if I put extra stuff into it. That's not that long ago. We're talking like 2005 and 6, which is not that long ago, but that shows you how the computer technology is advanced. Nobody gives a rat's ass about what you mean you can't store more than 1.4 megs? What? Don't you have a flash drive? And so that has become a non-problem, but it was a problem initially. So that's rechanged all of my feelings about what I need to get to, that I can save files. I'm nowhere near filling up my gigabyte drive on my computer here, even though I've been downloading PDFs at a furious pace. Yeah, the part of the lesson that I've been trying to pull across is to have a sense of where the levels are in discussion zones. So in anti-evolutionism, you've got layers of people. You have fact claimants, and there are very few of those. And then you have a larger body of parasites that copy them and try to sound sciencey, so they'll lob the paper. Standing for Truth is in that category. I think Jackson and I can both agree, because we both chatted with him, debated with him, that this is a guy that copies material from creationists and reads them. And he has stuff that he has online.
Rational Mind and Nestle found out after, or they were listening, I think Dragnaut also, while I was having my debate with Standing, they were listening to the language of him when he was talking about the Gulo pseudogene.
Yeah,
and they found
it very
interesting because he was reading an article directly from Answers in Genesis on it.
That's what he did. That's one of the reasons why he puts up the sponge blob thing and not his face. Other than maybe he looks like does he look worse than me? Good gravy.
Never seen
I have no problem with showing myself, but the point is that you would be able to tell,
I think you look
if
fine,
somebody
RJ.
were looking over to the screen reading the material as opposed to actually communicating directly. And you can tell when that's going on.
You know, I have no problem reading off stuff for a debate. I read for my opening statement, and I also knew all of his points he was going to say in advance with the help of you.
Yeah, oh boy, did we.
And so, I mean, I have no problem in principle with reading off of this stuff, but he's reading it off and then acting as though it's like his own, or that there's no argument against it, and it's just dishonest. There's nothing else you can call it.
I would have pled guilty to that sin back when I was 18 to 20 years old, before I learned proper source methods. I would be copying off stuff, and then you act as though you've done that work yourself, and you can sound instantly erudite, you think. But now you're totally dependent upon whether or not the people you were copying were right. And if you never bother to look to see whether they were in fact correct, both you and I have been prodding Standing for quite a while on whether he fact checks any of the stuff he reads. We've been trying to
Heck
get him
no.
to analyze Sanford's primary core assumptions, the Crow paper and the Kimura paper and the others, which we know, you and I know by direct reading, he has misrepresented the content.
Oh, absolutely, no question. You know, he in the debate itself, we prefigured he was going to reference the oh frick, what was it? It was one of the H1N1
ILV thing, that HILV thing, whatever.
Well, it was the H1N1. So
yeah, there we go.
We knew he was going to reference H1N1 virus because Sanford does it. Of course, he did, and we pulled the rug out from under him because we read directly from a I think it was a biologist criticizing Sanford on this point, and it just went over his head, and he just kept going. Yeah. It's like, we called you out on this. Sanford is dead wrong. I think that
if you look methodologically, Standing for Truth and Kent Hovind and Matt Powell are all, and Mike Riddle are all in the same methodological boat. They have a dogma that they want to be true. They act, and Eric Hovind is the same way. They're secondary channelers of other people's erudition, and they never fact check any of it. They have not an original thought in their body ever. They're merely copying other people's arguments, and you can never get to any level of understanding that way. 5:44. I'll probably be running over the hour because I was so bloody late getting started. Let me do my shameless plug here.
I was also late getting here.
Let me find out whether I can manage, if I can successfully screen share this time. Whole breath. Yay! Good gravy, it worked. Okay. Alrighty. There we go. And there's our patrons. I will say that I'm a much happier camper because I have finally worked out the settings that allowed me to open up the floodgates of Patreon money that was lurking out there, and that's why I was never getting any. So I'm actually starting to get that kind of stuff. And thank you, all the people, colleagues, Andrew and Hendrel and Eric, and our researchers, Keith and Fino and Brad and Ralph and Convert Me, Pelagia. Thank you, Pelagia, for helping to spread the word on the project. And Source Methods. Saw your debate with Thomason. That was neat. Zeshi, Zur. Assistant researchers, Direwolf, Doranku, Nya, or not available, depending on you want to look at it. Staggles, Ceres, who's doing the audio book with me on the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, and we will be doing an audio book after that of Evolution Slam Dunk. That's going to be a fun one to figure. And fortunately, I know the author, so I can persuade him to alter the text to make it audiobook friendly. Tot Israel, and then our friends Eatmeal and Stephen and Marigale and Daniel and Bo way off in Sweden, I think, or somewhere in the far lands. Alex Stone and Paul Williams, and some legacy patrons, people who helped a bit, and by now I'm now actually getting your contributions. And Jen and John and Mona and Son and Everett. Believe you me, I am so grateful for every person who has stepped up and helped on this, and hopefully there will be more things coming from the patrons over the years and over 2019, and that way I can slug along and continue to actually be in the point where I can buy ink regularly, which speeds up the research process enormously. So anyway, then we've got the linkages. I have the linkages in the description to the video, of course. There's my website, all of those PDFs in there you can download. There's also a tortucan.com shadow site that we were testing out doing HTMLs there on the initial modules. They're not all the updated versions of them, but at least there's an index and a few other little things that are tinkering around with there. It's a slow process, and I've gotten sidetracked, air quotes, in doing the books, which can be directly accessible to people. And it was also another way of making money that was suggested to me, that's between like things from the royalties and then the Patreon and the GoFundMe, and that every little bit adds up, and I'm very appreciative. So there's the Patreon listing, and there's the GoFundMe, and there's links to that. Now we can stop sharing and resume the happy world of discussing stuff. Okay, what do we got? Yeah, the whoops, am I not on a camera here? There we go. Not that it's necessarily improved on that. Yeah, I think the work that we've been doing, Jackson and I, on Rocks Are Still There, I think is going to be a really important contribution, because there's been sporadic criticism of Answers in Genesis arguments in various venues, and a lot of though of stuff on Sanford and Tompkins and Jensen, there's been, again, relatively little of this available, and certainly not pulled into one place. So what we're going to be doing is having collated into one thing a really heavy-duty demolition based on the most recent technical material of an awful lot of their stuff. And now that we know that Taz Walker has been checking out my material, we'll find out whether more of them may start noticing that there are some people out there that have got a new game in town called Source Methods, and we don't know what the heck that thing is. I wonder if it's a problem. Oh, it's very much a problem for you. And that the more people who get on the Source Methods bandwagon of reading the sources and what sources are there or not, never take people's word for it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Jackson's word for it. You don't need to take our word for it. We don't want you to take our word for it. Follow up and look up the material yourself. And we can guarantee you that the information is available on a scale that is gobsmacking. This is, I was just watching Andy Mame, which is one of my little favorite movies, and her motto was, "Life is a banquet and most poor slobs are starving to death." Well, that's what we have in the technical literature area, that the vast array of stuff that's instantly accessible by mouse click, that you can download them from the journal sites directly, or from professor sites, or Academia EDU, or ResearchGate. And there's just so many venues that you can find these things. Often technical papers are posted in the course syllabus for colleges, and they're open access. So you can go in and download the PDF of the thing. And that means that that information is not at a portal that you can't get to. No, you don't have to going to some grand library in a distant university and pour through the stacks and take out from the library and manually photocopy paste. No. We're way past that. That you can check out the material and the arguments that are being presented by me or by Creationist or by anybody else in any venue and track down the material yourself. Okay, let's see.
I actually had to track down a paper in an online library recently for our book, RJ. It was an Alfred Romer textbook, The Vertebrate Body, and Menton quoted it. He actually quoted the same paragraph twice, but cut into two parts and using two separate sentences as different arguments.
Double dipping. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's happened a lot. I hate double dippers. When somebody, some of the hilarious ones are when they've forgotten who they've double dipped from. So they'll have quoted something they nicked from one quote mine, and then a slightly different version of the same thing will have come from a separate quote mine, and they'll nick that, and it's got a different way that they've spelled the citation in that. They don't even realize what it is they've been citing themselves. I stepped on you there.
The funny thing was the paragraph he was double dipping from was actually a joke. That was the thing I said. He quoted literally a joke that Romer was making in his book as an argument. He quoted the punchline
as though it were a serious point. Yeah. Well, that's where the interesting thing would be if Menton was deliberately getting it from the original source material, in which case he's misrepresented it, or is dull as a sack of hammers and doesn't understand what he reads, or is he glomming onto it from a secondary source and never actually read the original material. Those are the only three alternatives, and none of them are nice. So that's the advantage of primary source methods, because it's not a matter of, oh, he didn't cite Romer, we don't have to worry about it. No, he cited Romer. He quoted Romer on this particular point. So now you've got him. There's only three alternatives there. And so which is it? Are you clueless? Are you dull as a sack of hammers? Are you misrepresenting as parasite? Which one is it? And this is not a good place to be if you are attempting to sound like you are so well researched. And that's what makes, when Standing for Truth would toss that article, I don't know whether he's going to feel happy that he prodded me on that article to where he said that, and this particular Sanford article from 2015 that he co-authored, that he said, this was rock solid. It's irrefutable.
Right. Oh. Yeah. Well, I mean, he also doesn't listen to anything anyone tells him, so everything to him is irrefutable. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
him. I actually watched him because I'm in a hangout with him and a few other people on Google, where he's actually in a room with a bunch of biologists talking to them about biology, and he has no idea what the crap he's talking
He's
about.
trying to lecture to them on their field how
Yeah.
much he knows about it.
These people are actually geneticists, and he's trying to tell them.
Oh,
And it's just
are you going to be available next week for Evolution Hour, Jackson? You think?
I should be. Is that when Heron's coming
Good,
on?
because Matthew Garrett will be on next week. I've
Okay.
been really looking forward to that, and I'm sure we'll have oodles and oodles and oodles of shop talk on that. And I'm also going to be having the post to his latest technical paper up on multicellularity issues that he just came out with.
Assuming
So
work won't jump in at the last minute, I should be there. So
yeah, I've been really looking forward to it because there's a lot to discuss on intelligent design and anti-evolution apologetics that he has bumped into, and also his main thing, because he's like Mr. Volvox. It's just fabulous, the knowledge in that. So I'd love cherry picking people's brains to find out all the neat little nuggets that one can find out about that and clarify my own understanding of the matter. Because, I'm a layman, but a really curious one.
I found one of the most interesting things we talked about was when he pointed out to me that it's a big misconception that there would have been a lot of genetic changes associated with the transition to multicellularity. Actually, their genomes are nearly identical, and I was like, "Wow,
it's
that's
surprising."
crazy.
And it's even Conway Morris, who is a theistic evolutionist and a big guy, a Cambrian explosion research, and he would often get into jousts with Stephen Jay Gould over stuff, but. His position is, and I'm inclined to agree with it, is that multicellularity is kind of like inevitable in replicators. It may take a while to get there, but there's so many different ways that organisms have found way to share information and to adhere and coalesce and form cooperative bunches that the idea that multicellularity as an adaptive strategy is going to be rare in organisms. Once they work out, probably the kicker, and there was a paper on endosymbiosis that was making this point. That's the reason why bacteria have tended to stay bacteria, is because the bacteria that didn't get into the endosymbiotic trading game of lateral gene transfer, they could do that. But to create a nested endosymbiotic system, that's where things really started to go, because now the exchange formats are at a much higher level. And then they developed sex, which was an even more interesting method that came out of the conjugation system that allowed them to adapt faster than their parasites. And so instead of just wheel spinning to make yourself parasite proof in a prokaryotic setting, eukaryotes have other strategies to play with. And once you get that into that game, now they can go off in all sorts of directions. Of course, it didn't happen instantly. We didn't go from initial eukaryote and multicellularity to wildebeests in one jump. But nevertheless, it's a thing that gets set into motion. So that will be, I think, an awful lot. There'll be no shortage of topics to discuss with Matt next week, and I'm really looking forward to it. The one area too that I wanted to have everybody constantly keep in mind on the whole structure of how to deal with anti-evolutionism is to remember the layers of analysis. That you've got deep philosophy, why is there something rather than nothing, and morality and ethics, and a bunch of things about God or matter up here, floating up in philosophy land. And then down below, you have the data floor, which is all of that nitty gritty stuff from science and history. But below that is the part that people need to not ever forget is there, which is source methods, which is what sources do you rely on? How do you fact check them for accuracy? Do you play fair with all the data field? Are you trying to assess all of the data field, or are you cherry picking only little bliplets? Yeah, jump in there, Jackson.
Oh, I was just going to say that I've been doing that with Minton recently, analyzing his chapter on vestigial organs. Also, fun fact, I found out he made the same joke about vestigial organs as Evolution News and Views did. Haha. Looks like they all get their jokes from the same place.
Well, there's a lot of incestuous plagiarism going on. Menton, the thing that's fascinating about Menton is the amount of old stuff he has. And even there, when we were constructing the bibliography, occasionally I would go, oh, wait a minute, you got to look at the date in there. That a posting that's coming up in 2014 isn't from 2014. It's from a 1994 article he wrote for the St. Louis Dispatch back in the 20th century, years and years ago. An awful lot of his chunk stuff is old material that way. And so it's always fun to find out stuff that gets recycled and retread, but it's actually older material, like the 2007 stuff that was being used by Riddle when the book has actually been more recent. They're terrible on that provenance stuff. But I'm always a chronological thinker, so I don't want to know when is the latest date of it, but when was it actually constructed? And that means that bears upon source methods, because if somebody has written an article in 2003 that gets reprint in 2012, you can't accuse them of misrepresentation because they don't mention a 2010 article. But if it really was written in 2012, you can accuse them of sloppiness and lazy ignorance for not mentioning the 2010 article in 2012. So getting the chronology straight is, again, part of that source methods bit.
Right. Yeah. Menton in the chapter I'm reviewing is not only misrepresenting science, he's also misrepresenting history, which is fun because we actually have scientific articles about the history, and so he can't even do that right.
Yeah, which historical stuff is he bumping into?
I actually just got finished with it a little while ago on the appendix. So he's talking all about vestigial organs, and he's going after the appendix. And so he made this claim. He's actually made it a few times throughout the course of his chapter. He keeps asking this rhetorical question: how many people got their appendix removed because Darwin called it useless? It's like, yes, how many people did it? Please do tell us. And he and what's funny is that you can actually look up the history of it because there's a lot of technical research on the history of appendectomies. This is a medical practice that has an entire history behind it, and we can see the history.
The other half of it has to do with the gee whiz quality, that the appendix, although it is a vestigial element in human beings, is not totally functionless. And a brand new thing that you have alluded to, I can't remember, is from the Comprendu something or other. It's from 2017. But from people who have been studying this as their work, that the idea that the little appendix acts as like a microbiota bin that's gotten connected up in the immune system for quite some time, and we're still using it partly for that. This doesn't mean that it isn't still a vestigial system that isn't doing what it originally as an actual digestive thing, and it acts like a bottleneck. That's another factor why we can't get rid of it biologically, is because it acts like a little bottleneck that if you get rid of it, then you are preventing things from flowing in other directions. So we're basically stuck with it.
Right. What's interesting is that Menton actually starts off his chapter by defining vestigial, which is good. It's a good idea to define your terms. But right out, he defines it, and he gives it actually, ironically, an okay definition of vestigial.
And then fails to apply it.
And then fails over and over and over to apply. He says, he goes like, the definition, something like, because I compared it against a definition by Center and Mock, or Mook, however you pronounce it, who are looking at vestigial organs across mammals. And so I compare Menton's definition with theirs, and I was like, it's actually not a bad definition. But then he says throughout the entire chapter, no, vestigial means it's only useless. It's like, why did you define it at the beginning if you are going to ignore your own definition?
He's caught on the tropes. He wants the tropes, and so he can put the definition up as a meaningless concession, and then he repeats the tropes. Oh, Immutable Destiny has a thing on here. Should viruses be considered living organisms? That is a juicy question, and in fact divides an awful lot of thinking on it. In a sense, if you define an organism as an ability to replicate on its own recognizance, no, they aren't even alive in that sense. But viruses end up doing stuff that's really life-ish, and there's an awful lot going on them, because there's still a giant debate as to how much of viruses are indicating of stuff that was going on in prebiotic systems versus things that are spun off like foam on the beer on the biological processes that have come on since, and it's probably a bit of both of that. But it's still a fabulously complicated process. And my favorite one for a virus is that thing that looks like a little Martian lander. It's got little legs, and it's a hexagonal kind of a little packet of things. I can't remember the particular one. And then it has a little injector spike that injects its RNA down into the cell. This thing is just weird looking.
Isn't Is that the bacteriophage? I know what you're talking about. I gotta see if I can find it.
It's a viral thing, and of course you've got both RNA and DNA viruses.
It's a bacteriophage. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating bunch of that no man's land, in the same way that there's still a big discussion about introns, that how much of it is the foam on the beer spin-off of the full biological process, and how much of it are kind of little icebergs left over from other biochemical systems that have then still got stuck into the system.
I think,
and probably a bit of both.
I think Nick Lane was arguing introns were adaptive in the Vital Question, like they helped the Archaean deal with the bits of genome that the mitochondria was giving off in the early stages.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah.
If I remember correctly. It's been a little while since I read that book, but I do think that was part of it.
Yes, I think you gave me a PDF of that, so that is most thankful that I have.
It's a fascinating book, absolutely wonderful book.
Yeah, I alas have insufficient money to buy all the books and material that I'd love to. But for one thing, I'd love to have. If somebody out there has an old copy of the 1989 version of Pandas and People, not the more popular 1993 one that came out later, that is burning a hole in their library that they could care less about ever seeing and care to send it to me, I would be a happy camper, because I would love to be able to have the earlier version of that book available. I know National Center for Science Education had a copy of it, because years back I'd asked them to send me a thing, and they sent me a section of it. But I'd love to have the whole bloody thing. And I don't think it. I think it's totally out of print, so it's not something you can just order a back copy of. And I from a scholarly methods point of view, and you've already seen me do this in Slam Dunk and other areas, it's neat to see the evolution of somebody's thinking over time, which you can do if you have more than one version of something, like I did with Krieger in Slam Dunk, and I did the same thing with Dwayne Gish in, I think it was in Dynamania, where I was going into his discussion of birds evolution and stuff. It was either in chapter 2 or chapter 3, whichever one. Download my stuff from the website, damn it, and take a look at all that stuff. Put it on your little thingies, your viewers, and plow through it. Because I did a lot of work on that stuff. And as Jackson is well known, I've often got into little areas way ahead to where it saves people trouble in researching stuff, because I've already been there and already documented all that.
Indeed, you have. That was one of the early primers for our relationship when you pointed me to that Proto-Avis paper.
Yeah, I'm going, I know all about that.
What good and simple
and that's the difficulty that I think too many people who get involved in jousting with anti-evolutionists online forget, that they don't need or shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. So they're often doing masses of research redundantly, because they're doing something somebody else has already done, but they didn't know it was there.
And the Ken Ham chapter on dinosaur size, that one also.
Yeah, yeah. And so the idea is that I don't know everything, but I will be smug and pat myself on the back. I know a lot. And it's partly because I've been at it a real long time. I've been going at this for decades, and I have an advantage that some might not have today. Because, well, Slam Dunk is a perfectly fine example. If you removed all the material in Slam Dunk that is not available online, big swaths of the book disappear, because so much of it is based on book material or online stuff that is no longer online because they got rid of it. But I made a hard copy of it, like the Krieger stuff. And so I'm acting as I have a window to a set of interconnections that you wouldn't be able to replicate if you were restricting yourself just to what you can do by mouse click.
Well, the 4th AIG book isn't even online. They have the outline of the table of contents, but none of the chapters themselves are on the website.
And our lesson is we want to see the full text. And even Jackson has known how annoying I can be when he would do up a draft of a paragraph, and I go, what sources were they citing in that? You skip past that. And then when we looked up the sources, we discovered, oh, that's where it really gets juicy. And we discover, no, this was a disastrous mistake they just made, but you didn't spot it initially because you didn't follow up on the original primary sources. And that's happened so many times with me, to where I had a whole section in, I think, chapter 4 of the old tip book, where I went after Philip Johnson on stuff. It was either that or the Human Evolution chapter, one of them. And it was a point that I had not got initially from reading one of Johnson's books because I had glossed through. I went back and I was checking out the spelling of Stephen, because Google sometimes he would have it with a PH or a V in varying spots, and I was making sure I had the right spelling, and I hit this paragraph about Weinberg, and now by that time I was primed to notice dots from reading Duane Gish, and when I spotted the ... in that quote from Weinberg, I went, what was in the original? And I checked out the book that it was in. I could get all this free from the library, and I took them home, and that's when I discovered that Johnson had removed a really important point in that one sentence that he didn't want to discuss, and he didn't want his readers to know he wasn't discussing. So in this long paragraph that he quoted from Weinberg, he nipped out the meat. And I wouldn't have spotted that if I didn't pass through the second time and go through the primary sources. So it was a skill set that took a while to hone.
That's like that the quote on the bivalves, where the quote is like the guy says something like, it is what is it? He's like, it is surprising that all of the evolutionary stories from my childhood have been debunked. But it's like, when you look at it, he's talking about like two different groups of bivalves.
Yeah, it's like completely different. And so either again, that immediately opens up a scholarly structure. If they cited the original source, there's only two alternatives. They copied it secondarily from a quote mine, perfectly possible, because that's most anti-evolutionists do that. Or they actually read the original material, in which case they're misrepresenting its content. And neither one of those are good behavioral traits. So you have got them screwed at that point. One of my favorite ones, oh gosh, this was just, it was one where my jaw dropped when I found out what it was. And it was, every once in a while, there's this article cited by anti-evolutionists on human evolution, citing Lee from the Canadian Journal of Anthropology, 1991 or something like that. And for years, for one thing, I checked and it wasn't available online. And so I was frustrated that I couldn't track down this article. By an amazing, I can't even remember why I suddenly looked for it when I was out at Eastern Washington University, where I that's my college. And occasionally I'll go out there to find hard copies of stuff, because I just go into the stacks and they've got the hard copies. And I look it up and go, oh, they've got the Canadian Journal of Anthropology. Wow. So I go into the stack and look it up and discover no real journal. It's a pamphlet that was put out by a couple Canadian creationists in the 1980s and 90s. It was just a chintzy little thing, like 5 or 10 pages long. Why they had it, I had no idea. But they had their entire field. Most of it was obsessing about the Vikings and how Columbus wasn't really the first person to come to America. But they had these grumpy creationist stuff. And I would never have been able to know that if I hadn't checked out at a physical library, because there was nothing online. You couldn't find it anywhere. It's not online anywhere, for good reason, because it's not a real journal.
That's hilarious. That's like that was like that guy who we did a whole show about him, and I forget his name now, but he were trying to show that like abiogenesis is impossible, and he's writing it with someone. He quote wrote a paper with somebody else. We read his pamphlet. His little booklet is like 70 pages.
Oh gosh, yes. I can't think of his. It's blanked out. He's just an internet guy.
It's like Tim or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
I can't remember his name.
There was. Remember, I track 2,300 anti-evolutionists, and so you will forgive us all if we can manage to confuse a couple once in a while. And sometimes, I brain farts every once in a while, and I'm constantly forgetting whether it's Luther Sunderland or Luther Sutherland. And I have to literally check my notes to find out, because my brain just glitches up on that. But it's easy to do. That's why you write things down. That's why you keep track of things by sound method. And that's one of the advantages of writing either my old tip project or writing these new books, because it forces you to crystallize and fact check the material and produce a solid work that you can go, yep, I got it. I've got everything nailed down. I have all the things. Everything is typically correct and all that. Every once in a while, I'll hit a typographical error. These things happen. To err is human, but to correct requires sound method. So anyway, on that, a lot of the questions here are coming in about in relation to origin of life matters. And that, I think, is one of the other big deals. I've done previous evolution hours on it, and I strongly recommend focusing on this concept. Origins or bust is a dangerous place to go. It's not for the squeamish. First of all, we don't know how life originated in the way that we know how ALUs get into our genome or some other things, or how the reptile-mammal transition occurred. Do we have lots of suspicious circumstantial evidence and experiments to suggest it's a natural process? Yeah, but Massimo Pigliucci and a lot of other people will say, no, but we haven't figured it out yet. We don't have it nailed down. Even if it's a natural process, it's still some open-ended questions in there. And the moment you start acting as if it's all settled in a debate with a creationist, they've got an opening. So you want to bear in mind that origins or bust is a dodge they use to keep you and them from thinking about all the parts they don't want to think about. And they want to go to the, well, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? And if they don't like the origin of life, they can go back to the origin of matter and the universe and fundamental forces and all of that stuff. And you get bogged down in fistfights over anthropic reasoning. And it's just a mess to deal with. A fascinating subject. I don't shy away from it any more than I shy away from the Cambrian explosion. But you have to remember the reason why they're bringing it up is not because they have this intense interest in understanding whether or not amino acids can be formed abiotically or not, and the role of this in early pre-Luca organisms. No, they want this as a way of saying, well, you can't figure that out, so that means I don't have to think about anything else. I've obliterated evolution. And this, as I pointed out when I defined the term origins or bust, was how French anti-evolutionists proceeded. And Louis Pasteur even advised them not to do that. No, don't pin your God on the existence or non-existence of biogenesis, because if the scientists suddenly come up with the explanation, you're screwed. And he was warning them about that at the time. German evolution towards origins or bust thinking, Haeckel and others, they were all obsessed with working out what the first life was. Darwin and Wallace, meanwhile, said, who cares? That we don't need to know that. We can look at what happened at the now and work our way back from the now and worry about origins later. Wallace, who became a spiritualist to his dying day, was arguing that the origin of life was created by mind somehow or other. And you find modern intelligent design people glomming onto that. Darwin just kind of stuck with the warm pond model, and that was as far as he went with it because he didn't need to know. And we don't need to know that. It's a fascinating problem. And if you want to dive into the technical literature, as many can do that by all means, and you can shop talk at that level. But always remember, it should never be a surrogate for all the other issues. So when I bring up evolution subjects, I want to make sure we're on the right turf. Another area that pops up constantly, and Jackson has probably spotted this as well in his own discussions, is people use terms as if they mean what you think they mean. So they'll say, oh, I believe in evolution. And then you probe a little and you find out, no, they don't. They just accept microevolution, but they don't accept macroevolution or natural selection or speciation. Well, what form of evolution are you accepting? And so be very careful about how people use terms in one context. Or to pick an extreme case, Jackson, have you seen any of the exchanges that I've had? I do very little now because he's so annoying. PVSM, positivism versus naturalism on Twitter. If you haven't, I say don't, because he is arguably one of them. Imagine Edgar in Mr. Intelligent Design without any charm or intellect.
Well, that's half the creationists on Twitter.
Yeah, well, but he's this obsessed
all hide in anonymity.
PVSN, as I call him for short, complains constantly about skeptics. He despises skeptics, and skeptics are nasty people who aren't positivists like him. And the people in the skeptics include Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins and Feynman, Richard Feynman and others. And I'm going, Feynman? One of the most brilliant, wonderful, close to Tortugan-free persons I've ever seen in life. And he's a nasty, air quotes, skeptic. And you go around and around and around the mulberry bush on things with him. And he's incredibly tendentious. Well, people like that you can't deal with at all. But and so a discussion with him is almost useless because you can't even get a hook in on what they think because they don't really know what they think beyond the buzzwords. Your
that's go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's how I felt about the guy George that we were talking to on the Linsky experiments. I was gonna just bash my head against my laptop at the time he was trying to take us down a rabbit. So.
Yeah. Well, Nephilim free is the same way for me. It's he's a hyper presuppositionalist, and people like that, and there are others that fall into that same thing. That you can't have a discussion with them. All you can have is trying to get them off their monologue, so they can't answer questions, or if they ask a question, it's the same question over and over again. And even after you've answered it, they'll just keep asking the same question, because if the answer isn't the way they want their presupposition to frame it, they will continue asking that question. And that drove me nuts. Move on. And I will give when we've all had stuff moderated by the modern day hysteria, James. I'll give him this. He's fair and reasonable in that he actually manages fairness. So he would actually tell Nephilim, we've dealt with that, move on. And under those circumstances, you can engage in a discussion in which Nephilim is in the audience. But when Nephilim had his own chat afterwards, where he controls the microphone, whoop, he's right back to presuppositionalism, and you can't deal with
Good God. Yeah, discussions here with other creationists, and I just have to wonder, it's like, do they know literally anything about this subject? Because he does not express any knowledge of any topics he talks about. He's a perfectly nice guy, perfectly nice guy. He has no idea what on earth he's talking about in any field.
Many of them don't. I'm just saying hi to Nyanya in the thing, and thank for being a Patreon of my work. Now that actually I've worked that out, I'll say hi and thanks to all the people who have done so. I greatly appreciate it. But the ones that are more interesting, and very few of times do we ever get a chance to deal with the fact claimants. So most of the time you're dealing with a secondary redactor or an upper level secondary redactor that is a little more attentive to the principles and concepts and stuff they're dealing with, not just to read stuff off of a TV screen types. But it's relatively rare. Not many of the intelligent designers. Somebody asked me whether or not I would do a debate with Jonathan Wells, and I'd say, fine, yeah, I'd love it. But don't hold your breath on that. None of the intelligent design people seem terribly keen to do debates. And they prefer just to do their spiel. And they'll engage in a debate-ish or a presentation context. Behe has been a speaker where there's a theistic evolutionist and a young earth creationist and him. But he's not there really to engage them. He's just there to present the intelligent design talking points. Now, the creationists, the people who are most likely to engage in debate contexts are the secondary redactor types, Mike Riddle and some of these bunch. It's hard for people to get Jensen, although he has occasionally come out on things like that. And I don't know whether Sanford's ever bumped into stuff. You once in a while see Snelling, and that is a talking head, but I don't think he does many debates. And it takes a certain kind of temperament to deal with a debate context, and they're often people who are they have a tremendously good gift of gab, and they have kind of a preacher sensibility to plow ahead with things like that. And a lot of skeptics and pro-science people are reluctant to deal with debates because they feel they're going to be gish galloped to death. Which means I'll do shameless plug. I put the link in again to my debate with Kent Hovind, because I'm using source methods, not the usual technique. And I don't have a problem debating people because I don't worry about format. Whatever the format will be, I will adapt to it. And my goal is to bring forth for the audience to see the source methods problems that my opponents have, which means one prime rule of debate is know your opponent. Anybody that comes into a debate cold, where they're just simply repeating their talking points and hoping to make headway against somebody else whose talking points they haven't studied, no. And I know, Jackson, when you've done your debates, and I'm proud to see you do that, you've done your homework first. so that you research and know where the person has done it. If they either have a paper trail, which is really good, or they have a video trail. Video trails are sometimes harder to deal with because it takes so bloody long. How many hour-and-a-half Kent Hovind videos do you need to watch to be able to get a complete grip on his oeuvre? Whereas you can actually process some written material at a greater speed. So that's why I prefer people with paper trails. But sometimes you can't deal with it, and you'll have to deal with it however as well. But I argue that source methods approach is a universal toolkit that can be utilized by anybody that wants to do debates against such people and study the techniques and learn the methodology on it, and then learn, always rehearse. The thing that I was amused with your debate with Standing for Truth, as I was anticipating when he was pulling up his PowerPoint, and I was waiting for him to do exactly the same thing Casey Luskin did. He wasn't in a debate with me. He was doing Luskin was doing a presentation at a church venue that was open to the public, and I was finally able to meet the little guy. But the thing is that they had a PowerPoint that was gauged that like runs for an hour, and they're in a thing that's like where they have to spiel, or in Luskin's case, it was 20 minutes, and he runs out of time. In other words, he's not through his PowerPoint when he gets to the end of the time thing. And James had to actually call attention to the fact your time's running out. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And what that meant was laziness, because neither Luskin nor Standing in their own venues thought, okay, this is how much time I have to use. I have to tailor my argument to fit the time frame because I will pay a nod to my audience so that I don't look like an idiot. And both you and I, when we've done our debates, we want to make sure we have it down so we can present what we want to present in the time frame and then have time left over, not having to go, oops, well, I can't get to PowerPoint slide 48 yet.
Right. Yeah, the only time I had a problem with that was in the closing, because I was actually addressing the points, because I had basically blown to smithereens everything else he had said. And so I was addressing these points he was trying to throw out there, which some of them were just lies.
It's a skill set you'll have to lie, and I did, is online on the fly triage, because that's exactly what you're doing in a rebuttal, is figuring out what are the salient points and to go at them expeditiously.
Right. I some of the things he said, I was like, I just thought, there's no one dumb enough to have put that in an argument. No one would have done that. Like when his point about whales.
You naive lad.
No, I mean, like when he mentioned the whales, he said, well, he's like, well, here's a point about your whales. No, where are the echolocation genes in land mammals? I was like, the what? Where are the
and of course, if you know the creationist and intelligent design literature on this stuff, that since he's a parasite, he'll only know what it was that was told to him by the sources he copied from, because he doesn't do any independent research. And that is an Achilles heel that secondary parasites have. If you know how to deploy at just the right moment to pull the rug out from under them. The one area that I like to pay better attention to, but it's hard to do in a debate context because in a conversational one you can do that, is to lay down the gauntlet. Tell us what your sources are. And of course, both you and I would be insisting for Standing to put up his sources. And I'll give him brownie points. He does put up his sources a little bit, but they're not very good. They're secondary, they're tendentious, they're ones that he thinks are, why did you cite this? This doesn't support your argument. You know, didn't you bother to look? And I've never seen him respond to the ones that when he made his long little list after my debate with him. I went through and I researched every single one of them and discussed them, and he's never discussed them since. So he then moves the goalpost, and he did that with you, to where you would bring up a point, and then he would move to another point, and then move to another point.
Well, he did that with both of us in our talk on Neff's channel, where he was like, "Oh, here's this," or he said like, Jensen showed that, you know, the genetic bottleneck was real, or there was an increase from heterozygosity to homozygosity, and we said, show it to us. And so he's like, oh, here it's a secular source, and we were like, okay, because it was just this one little family of pictures, and we asked him over and over and over, why is this not applicable to everything? literal animals, and he had nothing. He dodged over and over.
Switched to another point. So
and
yeah,
dodged,
I described Kent Hovind that way in the old book. I said, willing neither to defend his position nor abandon it when I was in an exchange with him, because he wanted his point, which in his case was the stupid expanding sun argument. He wanted that to be true somehow or other, but he wouldn't defend the argument that he had used to get there, and tried to move to another argument that was wrong. And then he was, and then here's the thing that was revealing in my debate with Kent Hovind that I thought was really fascinating. It's that it clearly sounds like he has never given up on that argument. When he told me flat out that I don't use that argument anymore, when I called him on it back in 1997, I mean, this is not a news bulletin. And yet apparently he went back to it, which is why I don't think Matt Powell was ever seeing an old Kent Hovind video when he riffed off of it. I think he was seeing a more recent one, because Kent just went back to the same argument, even though it's like a Donald Trump speech. You know, he just goes back to the thing he was doing before as if it was true. And that's why Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of politics, or Kent Hovind is the Donald Trump of creationism. They're methodologically indistinguishable. And there we go. Well, we've zipped past the bit on here. Does anybody have any last minute questions over in the live chat there? And Old Scratch says Hovind went around sniping the after debate, or maybe he's referring to Standing. Both of them do that. I personally am not holding my breath that I will ever get a chance to have another debate with Kent Hovind.
Oh yeah, Standing was commenting on a bunch of different people, saying that I misrepresented stuff. He said I strawmanned one of his arguments when I called him out on it because he didn't know the material, which I remember specifically because he said haplogroups L, M, and N were the 3 women who got off the ark. But the problem is M and N came from L. So that's it. Unless the mother, or unless Noah's wife gave birth to the other women.
Yeah, even when Joshua Swamidass, when he was on Evolution Hour, pointed out that genetically it's physically impossible for there to have been a Noah's Ark bottleneck. It's just way too recent, and none of the haplotypes match up. And I have never seen any serious attempt to get around that. You find Jensen doing shell games with things, as I pointed out in the revision to the Rocks book, how either Tompkins or Jensen, where he was relying on that old 1997 work that was totally superseded as to some genetic information regarding humans that were some particular mutations apparently were coming up over the last 6,000 to 10,000 years. But the problem is there's been new data since, and always be suspicious about the data stuff. You really want to pay attention to that. So, and that's why I avoid using older material if there's newer material. So you can pay attention to 1980s and 1990s stuff as historical interest, is to show the provenance of how an argument developed. That's perfectly legitimate. But anytime when I read a source and they're lobbing a technical source at us and it's like 1985, I'm going, wow, there's been no work on it in the last 30 years. Ooh,
oh, that's precisely what in the Menton chapter, he cites a 2007 paper. 2007 is the most recent thing he has since like the 80s, I think, as far as his sources go.
Yeah, and which means what he is he's glommed onto something which he sees as new ammo in the quiver of old stuff that he has previously. Riddle, in just that little thing which we were dealing with on that chance bit, not a single one of the sources dates for the 21st century, even though the paper, his chapter is written in 2013. And none of them are technical works. They're all either secondary science things or general books, and they're all 20th century stuff. And he's talking about origins of life research, like nothing has been done since. And that's where he came up with the 60 trillion cells. How long would it take for them all to jumble together by chance? Because as everyone knows, all evolutionists believe all organisms have to be formed all at once, individually, so that they're, the first human being was just cells just glomming together for no particular reason. No, I don't think that's how we think it works.
Like one rock bumped into another rock and an organism resulted from that.
You got your rock and you got your scum, And somehow the rock turned into scum, and that turned into dogs. And oh, the other one that's really fun, and this is one that you can spot a lot in grassroots people, is they get the sequence wrong. So they'll say that something turned into a fish, which turned into a bird, which turned into a human being. And they'll get the things, going, excuse me? No, or somebody who thinks that somehow we're descended from starfish or something, and they'll put the wrong things on there, and they'll going terribly sorry, but no, please don't put rhododendrons on that. That's a plant. We have a long divergence line along there. So
there are no dog snapdragon crosses.
I use the map of time concept a lot. And don't ever forget it. I know we're running over here, but I may as well beat this horse while we're at it. Map of time is simply the thing you carry around in your own head about what you think happened. And it may be more or less detailed, but everybody has some map of time. Hopefully, if I say Abraham Lincoln to you, you're not thinking he lived in the Middle Ages. You're thinking he lived in the 19th century. You may be more precise and to know that he was assassinated in 1865. You may or may not know that he was born on the same day as Darwin in 1809, so that there are all sorts of things that would be in the map of time stuff. Well, the same thing goes for all the life forms. And to get things straight, so you want to remember that radiocarbon dating does not apply to dating things that are millions of years old. You want to remember that dinosaurs are a long time ago during the Mesozoic. You need to know what the Mesozoic was. These are all things that you can go, and there are tons of different resources. Easy one is to get a good general description book from the library. It won't cost you a damn thing, and plow through it at your leisure and figure out what things are. And another thing that I do is, if you are in doubt, make up your own chart, construct your own thing, put things in order, group them together in ways that make sense to you. Like, what's a eukaryote? Okay, that's an eukaryote. That's a prokaryote. Ooh, and they got funny little names. Okay, I can look those up. And even if you don't remember all the physical things, and Jackson's way better at the systematic terminology than I am. I have to write crap down, and he can just rattle his stuff off in just memory because he's closer to it, because you're a student in that area. So you've got it in a different way. I'll do a shameless plug for that Valentine Phyla book. Holy moly, is that chock-a-block with information, so that you'll have a good, even though it was written now, yipes, 2004, so it's 14, 15 years ago, but still you'll not treat it as gospel in the sense there may be new information as to some phyletic classifications and the like, but the cast of characters won't have changed. And it's a very meticulous book. I have that myself, and it's just a juicy little thing. So after you get slam dunk, deal with that. Okay, well, we're 6:35, way over line, even accounting for the fact that I had trouble getting started. Thank you for everybody who stuck out in the blob of silence while I was trying to get Google back started on that. Oh my gosh, I was just seeing this Google not responding. Do I dare shut it down, or do I wait for it to restart? But we got that out of the way. So there's another show. And next week, again, Matthew Herron is going to be on. Everybody keep rattling the material on source methods and using it at every opportunity. I'm open for lectures. I can do Skype. I can do video lectures like this. If you can pay my fare, I can go physically anywhere within the United States, because I don't have a passport. I never did get one of those. I suppose I'll have to get one of those one of these days. Anybody wants me to do stuff relating to Darwin Day material on the 22nd or thereabouts, let me know, and that can be done. So yes, Old Scratch, thanks for the stream. And we will then shut ourselves down for the next time and keep plugging away at it. Source Methods rocks. Okay, stopping broadcast.